At least 12 different species of humans have been discovered, so let's talk about all of them. Well, the oldest fossil of our genus is a jawbone dating back to 2.8 million years ago. We don't know much about who this hominid was, but its teeth strongly suggest that it was part of our lineage. So though these remains do not have a name, it's probably its own species. The oldest species formally recognized was Homo habilis, which lived between 2.4 to 1.4 million years ago in Africa. They were the first human species to consistently make and use stone tools. The next species to appear was Homo rudolfensis between 2 and 1.8 million years ago in East Africa. They had notably larger brains and flatter faces compared to Homo habilis. The next species evolved 1.8 million years ago and were the first truly human species, Homo erectus. This is due to a few reasons. For one, they had the same limb proportions as modern humans, allowing them to chase down prey over long distances and also to throw efficiently. They also had larger brains, used fire, and were making much more complex stone tools. This species is also important because they were the first to spread out of Africa, spreading into Europe and Asia. Now that populations of hominids were living around the world, they adapted to their local environments, leading to new species. One of these being Homo antecessor. They lived in Europe from about 1.2 million to 800,000 years ago. They are some of the earliest hominins in Europe, and evidence suggests that they are routinely cannibalizing one another. The next species to evolve was Homo heidelbergensis. They had large brains, prominent brow ridges, and robust builds. They made complex stone tools, and their populations would eventually adapt to their environments, forming the Neanderthals in Europe, the Denisovans in East Asia, and Homo sapiens in Africa. The Neanderthals lived in Europe and Western Asia from about 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. They had stocky builds adapted to cold climates and brains as large, if not larger, than modern humans. They used complex stone tools, made cave paintings, created fire, and even buried their dead. They were by all means humans, and we would eventually breed with them. Denisovans were the close cousins of both us and Neanderthals, and they lived across East Asia. They lived from roughly 300,000 to 50,000 years ago across Asia, and modern populations, especially in Oceania, have up to 5% Denisovan DNA. Our species emerged in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. Homo sapiens is the only surviving human species and has spread out to every continent. But 300,000 years ago, there were actually multiple species of human living in Africa. Homo naledi was a strange small hominin with a brain around the same size of a chimpanzee. The third hominin from Africa we only know by DNA, the so-called ghost hominins. We still don't have any fossils or even a name for these hominins, but some populations have up to 6% DNA from them. Lastly, there are the two tiny species of human living in Southeast Asia. Homo floresiensis is the most famous of the two. They stood only about 3.5 feet tall with tiny brains and other primitive features. They survived until about 50,000 years ago when our species finally made it to the island. The lesser known hobbit species was Homo luzonensis. This species was discovered in 2019 from fossils found in the Philippines dating to 67,000 years ago. There are undoubtedly other species of human waiting to be dug up and others that we will identify from our own DNA. It's definitely going to be some fascinating discoveries in the future. Best believe I'll be covering them on my YouTube channel Northo2.